This is the servitization in the HVAC industry, the why, what, and how. We'll be running for about an hour or so. We're going to be looking at servitization, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning industry. I welcome all of you who are here today, and we're looking forward to an interesting discussion between ourselves and our guests in a fast-moving and a fascinating industry. And I'm looking forward to a good hour of discussion and questions contributed by yourselves. This is being recorded, and the download will be available, sent as a link to you shortly, also with a white paper I'll touch on a bit later on as well. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy the next hour with us. So the agenda today. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes introducing the people here today and ourselves, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Parikshit, who's going to talk about the servitization and advanced services. We then have our first guest, Clara, who will talk about some of the learnings, and then James tackling some of the competitive issues in the sector, and then we've got a Q&A session. I'd love you to please put any questions that you have as you go through the webinar. Please put them in the Q&A section. That makes it much easier for us to better monitor them. I'm going to pull them out, and we will then take those questions and pass them on to our panel at the latter part of the session. And I'll then just do a few closing remarks at the end. So I'll moderate the question and answers taken from the Q&A session. So the speakers over today, my name is Ian Mate. I'm the Managing Director of the Advanced Services Group, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Parikshit Naik, who is the Business Development Manager for the Advanced Services Group. And we have two guests today. I'm delighted we've got Clara Otterson, who's a Research Manager, Heating and Business Services at LCP Delta. And we have James Galloway, the European Technical Director of CGen. I'd then like to just spend a few minutes, for those of you that haven't come across the Advanced Services Group before, just a little bit more about ourselves. So we are a business that formed out of the Centre of Excellence at Aston Business School, led by Professor Tim Baines. Tim and his colleagues are the leading scholars, the most highly cited scholars in the field of servitization and advanced services. And that's the area that we're focusing on today in the HVAC sector. A little bit more about us. We are a business which is focused solely on servitization and advanced services. All of the work we do is around taking the knowledge and experience and the research that's been done by manufacturers and technology businesses and helping to apply that practically. So helping people to become more and more expert in the field of servitization. We do that essentially by working with businesses. We've worked with over 450 businesses over the last 7 or 8 years. But in the example of all of these businesses, whether they're large or small, global or tiny, we're about the same thing. We're about focusing on how can we accelerate the adoption of advanced services within businesses. We believe that advanced services are the most sustainable way for people to buy products and services and develop and get the outcomes that they're looking for. So our work is based with the companies that you can see on this screen here and many, many more. And we're going to spend some time talking about advanced services and servitization as a prelude to the main topic in this sector. Now, we've done a white paper, which we will be sending to you on a link shortly as a member of this webinar, and we'll be also publishing it as well, which will look at the topics which we're going to raise today, but there's many more voices and much more detail and information for you to look at. So it should be an interesting read after you've seen the webinar as well. So you'll get that shortly today. So before I move on to the HVAC as a topic, the first thing to think about really is the elephant in the room. What is servitization? I've used it 2 or 3 times already. And what are advanced services? And those are the two topics we're just going to refer to briefly. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Parikshit Naik, if you would blind, please, just to try and answer those questions, please. Thank you very much indeed. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Ian. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who has joined us, listening to us from different countries. To get into the details of really how servitization and the topic of advanced services is relevant to the HVAC industry. Let's start with what really is servitization and what are these advanced services that we're talking about. If you look at the infographic in front of you, what we call as the services staircase, you will see it's a step-by-step approach of increasingly complex services. As we go higher up in this staircase, on the y-axis, you can see that the provider of such services has an increasing potential to add more value to the customer, to their own business, to the general value network that they operate in. At the same time, there's potential for absorption of risk, which can actually lead to more competitive advantage. Now, the absorption of risk is, of course, important because there are some players or some stakeholders within this value network. Let's take HVAC industry, for example. Different stakeholders have different capacity to absorb this risk. And if we can place this risk with the best people equipped for that, there's more value to be had for everyone. Now, if we think of the different services, let's start at the very bottom. Start with the product. The outcome we're trying to achieve with this is, yes, we will supply product. HVAC industry has had this. It revolves around supply of heating and cooling equipment. There's product spares involved. If something breaks down, here are the spare parts that you can use to fix this. If you would like us to fix it for you, that's the next step. This is where you, as you notice, the orange colored tick boxes have changed into the purple ones. The orange bottom steps are what we call base services. Now we are entering the domain of what we call intermediate services. So if something breaks down, we will restore the condition of this product. So therefore, break fix. There can also be assured maintenance services. For example, if within operation something happens to the equipment, we will be there within 48 hours to bring it back to the condition expected from this product. That would be what we call assured maintenance. Up to this level, a lot of businesses do provide these type of services. They provide the product, they provide the spares, they will fix the product, and they will also assure maintenance services. Increasingly, with the rise of digital technology and the easy accessibility to digital technology, we can also see what we call performance advisory services. This is where providers help the customers gain maximum value out of the product. This would be heavily driven by the digital insights that we can gain from how the customers are using the product, how it is performing in the field, how is the condition of the product in the field, and how it can be best used, in combination with the extensive knowledge and intellectual property of the manufacturer or the product supplier. To this level, these are all what we call intermediate services. Now, what is really then what we call advanced services? That is the top layer of the staircase, where you are looking at guaranteeing the outcome from your products or the business processes in which the product sits or the business platform of your customer. This is where we see services such as heating or heat as a service and cooling as a service operating. It doesn't mean that you only provide the advanced services and not the services under those steps in the staircase, but it is a combination of all of them. You cannot provide just heating or heat as a service or cooling as a service without all of those underneath them. They lay the foundation for more complex services. And the journey of any business to provide these services, starting from the bottom of the staircase to the top of the staircase, is what we call servitization. So using this graphic, you can very well understand what really is servitization. It is a journey of transformation for a product-led business to move away from selling just products, but a combination of increasingly complex products and services, and especially looking at guaranteeing outcomes from the products. Now let's think about it from a business model perspective. We were talking about it from a very value proposition level, that what does the customer actually get? But how does the business model change? And you can understand any business model, whether a service-centric or a product-centric one, using these 4 quadrants on your screen. On the top left-hand side, you're looking at customer value proposition. So how will we create value? What will the customer get? On the right-hand side, it's the value delivery system. So how will we actually deliver the value? What are the resources and competencies and tools and techniques we can use to deliver it? They are 2 different things. The value proposition, the service, is different from how you deliver the service. Then on the bottom left is the value capture process. You're looking at how do we capture value back to us. Now, in this sense, value is not just monetary value. but also other forms of value, such as knowledge, such as strategic value and relational value as well. And finally, as a combination of these three, we look at the green box, which is your competitive advantage. How do you gain a competitive advantage? By differentiating your value proposition, your delivery system, and your value capture process. Now, if we look at heat as a service and cooling as a service and any advanced service in the HVAC industry, it's important to understand what does not form an advanced service that we commonly see nowadays in the industry. First of all, you may have come across many of these finance options where you can get an asset, let's say a boiler or a heating equipment or an air conditioner or a chiller on a finance deal. You don't have to pay upfront. It will be spread over time. Is that really an advanced service? It doesn't guarantee any outcomes. It is only subsidizing or spreading the cost, the capex, and turning it into a longer term fee. This is part of the entire heat as a service business model, but this is only a way of capturing value. So I would put this into the orange box particularly. We can look at what we commonly see as maintenance contracts, service level agreements, that you can buy different levels of maintenance agreements from a product supplier or a distributor or an installer. Is that an advanced service? That is a very complex maintenance contract, but it still doesn't guarantee you the outcome from a product or a process. So this would fit very well within the pink box of how you deliver the value, but it doesn't define the value proposition itself. It's not heat as a service or cooling as a service by itself. And finally, we see a lot of digital technology picking up within the industry, smart home technology and data analytics, helping businesses understand how they are using this equipment. When this would fit very close to the performance advisory services that I mentioned early on, or would become a part of heating as a service or cooling as a service. However, by itself, the digital technology and the information it gives you is not heat as a service. It is a very strong enabler of it. So having understood these things of what heat as a service is or what cooling as a service is, let's see where and how well it is maturing in the industry, how well these solutions are gaining traction. If we place it on the staircase again, look at the green boxes. By that, I mean to denote the commercial and industrial segment of both heating and air conditioning industry. We can see that up to the performance advisory level, there are some businesses that are providing these services. However, there is an ambition, an increasing ambition, to reach the second level of advanced services, where you are guaranteeing the customer process capability. So you're looking after the cooling process itself of a commercial or an industrial segment as your customer. As compared to that, the domestic segment hasn't reached that level of maturity yet. We can already see services to the level of assured maintenance, where if something happens to your home boiler or an air conditioning set at your home, the supplier or the product-led business will come and fix it within a certain amount of time, and they assure their performance. But there is an ambition to go higher up, maybe not all the way to process capabilities, but to the level of guaranteeing asset capabilities. Now, at this point, while we understand the ambitions of what heat as a service and what cooling as a service could do in these industries, it is riddled by a lot of challenges. And to go deeper into some of the challenges, I'll pass on to Clara, who'll tell us a bit more about the different challenges, specifically in heat as a service from the domestic or the residential segment. Over to you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Parikshit. So before I start discussing the challenges, it probably makes sense to clarify what we at LCP Delta mean when we talk about heat as a service in the residential segment. And we have categorized heating propositions that go beyond just selling products into 3 different categories or levels of heat as a service, if you will. First of all, we have what we call project and protect, which essentially is a finance plus maintenance offer where the provider designs and carries out the installation of the heating appliance, offers a finance option, often in partnership with a third party, and finally offers a maintenance contract. These contracts are typically not very long. It could be 2, 3, maybe up to 5 years, and the customer will own the appliance throughout and after having paid off the appliance. One step up from that, we have what we call normal heat as a service. And at a glance, it's quite similar to the first level, project and protect, but there are a few differences. First of all, it's a lease or a rental contract, meaning that the heating provider will own and maintain the appliance, thus taking on a lot more risk in case of breakdowns, optimization, efficient operation, and so on. And the contract times are also most often quite a bit longer, 10 to 15 years seems to be the standard. Maintenance will always be included in these types of offers, and other services may be as well, like remote diagnostics, optimization, and so on. Now there are, like I said, the provider will own the appliance during the contract time, and at the end of the contract time, there's often a possibility for the customer to then take over the ownership of the appliance. Finally, there is what we call full heat as a service, which is essentially has the same components as normal heat as a service, but it also includes the energy supply bundled into the monthly fee. And that's why it's the complete package that the customer pays for the heat outcome or output rather than the kilowatt hours going in. And this is also the most rare type of heat as a service. To have a successful proposition, it's obvious that there needs to be something there that the customer wants. And we see three main drivers for heat as a service from the customer perspective. So first of all, heat as a service removes the upfront cost barrier. As you know, heat pumps are more expensive compared to gas boilers, and that cost is a barrier for many to buy a heat pump or other more expensive low carbon heating appliances. And heat as a service could make these more expensive heating appliances available to more people. But even if the customer did have that capital to spend, they may not be willing to spend it on something maybe as so trivial as their heating appliance. And heat as a service will allow the customer to spread that cost over a contract time of 10 years, let's say. However, as I mentioned, project and protect can achieve that as well. So it's not only heat as a service that can achieve those results. But the final driver for customers is that having a single provider that owns and maintains their heating appliance can provide peace of mind that their heating appliance is looked after, that it will always be working efficiently, and that someone will come to repair it if it breaks down. And this might be especially attractive with heat pumps that might be an unfamiliar technology for many. This peace of mind also becomes increasingly important if other components or services are included, and the installation or the system becomes more complex. For example, if you add products like PV or other energy equipment in the home. Despite these drivers, the current customer appetite for heat as a service is quite low. Our most recent customer research from March in this year shows us that only a very small share of homeowners would in fact choose heat as a service for their next heating appliance purchase. As this chart tells us, the absolute majority want to pay upfront. And actually, if we look historically, the willingness to pay upfront has been increasing over the past few years. We asked a similar question in our customer survey from the end of 2021. And at that time, 40% of homeowners wanted to pay upfront. The year before that, it was 34%. So a steady increase of wanting to pay upfront. However, there are still opportunities for finance. As we can see, there is definite interest in getting finance from the heating appliance provider, which would be probably be categorized under the project and protect level. There's also interest in adding it to an existing mortgage and so on. but heat as a service is not the preferred option. There are some differences between countries, and actually homeowners in the UK are much more likely to choose heat as a service than in any of the other countries, and would also prefer heat as a service to a regular bank loan. Heat as a service has been a buzzword in the residential heating sector for a while without being established properly, and we believe there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, if we look at it from a service provider perspective, heat as a service propositions are often very complex. They might generate more profit, but it's at a much higher risk, and it will take longer to generate that profit. The risks include customer default, taking on behavioral risks, and energy price risk. And then secondly, heat pump demand is already growing rapidly, and both manufacturers and installers have their hands full and are barely keeping up with demand as is. So why would they bother with a new proposition that will just provide more complexity, more work for them? And finally, we're all aware of the energy price crisis, and that really deters the inclusion of the energy supply in the contract. It's just too big a risk that you can't really price in. So why would you not just offer the project and protect model, which is a lot less complex, but equally attractive for customers? If we look at it from a customer perspective, the benefits of normal or full heat as a service compared to the project and protect model are not really clear. The project and protect is generally cheaper over the contract time, and customers find it more appealing to not be tied into a very long contract. If energy is not included, it does become difficult for suppliers to justify the premium prices that are often put on heat as a service contracts to the customers. And these, obviously, customers don't want to pay more than they feel is right. So how can providers innovate, and how can they adapt their business models to attract more customers? Now, our research has found that heat as a service models work best when it's solving two or more problems, and heat as a service basically only solves one. But if you start looking at whole home solutions like energy as a service or energy efficiency as a service, these models are far more complex, as more components need to work together. And it's becoming increasingly interesting for customers to have one point of contact, one provider that can help them with all of their questions, that can take care of the end-to-end journey from design and installation to maintenance of all these different energy equipment in their home, from the PV panels to your EV charger, your heat pump, your battery, whatever you may have in your home. And then that cost, the premium cost of a service, can really be justified because it's taking care of this complexity. And finally, innovative finance solutions exist that are worth exploring further. Things like salary sacrifice schemes for heat pumps, or green mortgages, where customers are offered a discount on their interest rates for carrying out energy efficiency measures or improving the energy efficiency in their homes. Now, it's clear that there are plenty of challenges from the provider and the customer perspective, but the general competitive landscape of HVAC will also need to change to accommodate heating as a service and cooling as a service. And we'll now hear from James in more detail about this.
Thank you, Clara. And I think that's a really excellent point to kind of hand over, looking at those market landscapes and also that kind of perspective of customer centricity and product centricity as well, from Richard earlier. So I just want to kind of talk to you about a kind of mid to long term kind of trend, what might happen in the industry, what we're seeing now. And I want to look at it from a kind of pull and a push perspective. So from competitors positioning themselves in this space, but also consumer pull. But let's start with an interesting number there, 21%, which is the share of CO2 emissions from heating and hot water for buildings in the UK. Now, when we have an obligation to reduce CO2 as a nation by 2050 completely, that's a massive challenge. So especially when you look across the total residential market, especially with 29 million homes there or thereabouts, that's a big challenge. So let's just have a look at how much consumers are actually spending in the UK on gas and electricity. Last year, it almost doubled. I think we all felt that, and especially for both gas and electricity. So that market value for gas and electricity is enormous. Now, in a 100% decarbonised scenario, if you just project this forward, and you can all do this, there's kind of relatively straightforward maths using the average bills published by the UK's largest utility company across kind of standard housing profiles. It's all moving to electricity. So that's a lot of companies who are currently quadrupling or doubling their profit margins, which we all hear about, that are at risk of losing that profit margin. Or on the flip side, a lot of companies who have a new stake in that enormous market. So the context there is, how is the market changing? And what will that mean in terms of new competitive entrants into this market space? Especially when there are certain customer-centric perspectives, such as outcome-based business models, where you really would be looking at finance and data analytics kind of enabled propositions, which are perhaps not always for traditional expertise areas within manufacturers. So there's a lot of change happening over the coming mid to long-term period, is the key point. Let's dig a bit deeper into what that really means for a homeowner. So let's start with the left-hand slide, left-hand chart there. In 2019, you see the average split of that spend for home heating and for electricity for the home, and also for fuel. Let's talk about cars and electric vehicles as well. Just add that in the mix. So with this doubling last year, now a lot of consumers were protected by the £2,500 limit on average. That's protection. That's an artificial protection. So that is a huge price increase. Everyone is feeling that. Energy is, I think, one of the major drivers for inflation currently. And yet this big red circle indicates that big upfront cost barrier to achieving lower bills. So if you get a heat pump, if you get an electric vehicle, if you get solar panels on your roof and a battery, if you're able to afford that, that's great. You can reduce your bills, but you've got to pay for it. So I think that's, looking to the right-hand chart, I think that point about finance, it's not true heat as a service, cooling as a service, or energy as a service, but it is a path, it's a starting point. And with that alone, customers can actually overcome those upfront cost barriers and achieve lower costs and actually improve their credit rating and potentially also improve their asset value. So again, linking into Clara's point there about green mortgages, there's an incentive, and it brings new players into the market as well. So as an asset test, viability is certainly there, and it's a step towards true customer-centric, outcome-based propositions. But to do that really well, you really want to be looking at the total kind of home energy environment. So on the left-hand side, with very limited integration with traditional, currently, by coincidence, carbon-based technologies. But really, if you integrate those products and technologies together, that will be by far the best way to offer new and better value for customers, especially with data analytics, to understand how the products can work optimally together to offer really the lowest cost of operation and best comfort levels, be it heating or cooling or energy in general in the property. So this integration, again, it's a new skill set, but inevitably it will require partnerships. So there's an interesting challenge strategically, how a company would assess its strategic choice to develop something in-house or to partner with another company to achieve an outcome-based business model, such as heat as a service, cooling as a service, or energy as a service. And typically you see kind of big players, which are utilities, who are very legitimately, able to offer a proposition in that space. And then you've got manufacturers who are already on that kind of make and service, performance guarantee space as well. So really legitimate players. But then you've also got finance and you've got big data analytics. So again, I think companies that are in this space also have a legitimate opportunity. So the question is, how would companies work together and choose to perhaps extend it into one or two more areas to offer energy as a service? And this will be really interesting in terms of how this market emerges and we see new competitors entering the market and traditional incumbents evolving the business model to compete for that really massive share of energy and also products revenues. So I think just having a look at that kind of proposition value, linking back to Verikshit's model there, the staircase, we look at moving on already beyond that traditional product transaction perspective, finance and maintenance beyond that. I see now this kind of enhanced digital proposition being a really key point that we're at now, as integrators are already becoming more established and looking for those ways to create more value through data insights between different products and technologies tailored for the customer. And that is then a short step up to really understand how really an outcome-based model might be of most interest for customers. But that's also behavioral. So that also takes time to build familiarity and awareness in the market. But I certainly see that as a route to increase value share. And that's, again, linking into that, who owns that risk? Who is best placed to own that risk and offer the best service? And then one last perspective of, especially from a traditional manufacturer perspective, making those business model change, that kind of transformation is big. It's not small at all to do that. And through my experience in HVAC sector for now 17 years, I see three main factors that are at play. The customer experience, so new ways of buying. Clara's point there about 60% now, actually more, year on year wanting to own the asset. So it's a bit different, although subscriptions are by no means new, just perhaps new in HVAC sector. But then within an organization, the strategy and culture and the people that are, the expertise available for an organization to deploy finance models or big data analytics with new business models. And linking that all in for a seamless experience, not only for customers, but also for employees to actually run an as-a-service proposition, that's also a big change. So I think, again, really interesting regarding that decision around choice of how to develop in-house or to develop inorganic strategies for growth into this area, I think will be a big point of agenda for C-suites across the sector. And that brings my part to an end. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Clara. Thank you, James. Thank you, Parachute. That's been really interesting. We have a number of questions you will see in the Q&A, and I'm going to just pick on one or two of them and then just pass them out to the lucky winner of the panel question selection game. I'm going to go first of all, James. You kindly pointed out you've got 17 years of experience in the sector. That puts you in prime position for a question I'd like to just pick up, if you wouldn't mind. We've got some questions here. A question here about the B2B area. So a question that Jan Pinkler's put in here was when talking about full heat as a service, the question they have, and they've extended it into a couple of different comments, is about how do you handle the legal position for equipment which is located on a customer's property? So in terms of the implications for insurance and risk and what happens if they don't pay, and the implication for tax as well. So a complex position really, but what happens if you've gone to a complete heat as a service in a B2B environment and the equipment is on a customer site, maybe at multiple sites and it's across a number of different areas? What happens with regard to the risk, the insurance, and what happens if things break down, the relationship, or the company goes bust? What do you see as the way that the contract and the relationship would modify? How would that be satisfactorily dealt with, maybe in a contract basis?
Yeah, really good question. I think actually in a B2B context, probably risk profile may be lower compared to very high volume of B2C contracts, because you have a better understanding of the customer. And so there's an aspect about tax there. So IFRS 16 rules, so they changed in 2019, I believe, changed the way that companies can account for these assets on the balance sheet to be more, you track it every year. So actually for a customer, from a kind of tax perspective, it's favorable to have a subscription model, first point. From an insurance perspective, I think it's about understanding the risk. Is the customer likely to default? Likelihood of damage or misuse of the product? All of these risk factors can be mitigated with a good clause, but also through very strong partnership with an installer or maintenance company. So you may, a company who's offering that proposition may subcontract the maintenance work out. Therefore, it would be really important to have a very strong SLA, service level agreement, to ensure high quality of work. So you can mitigate the risks generally through strong contracts. It's not a new concept to have assets fixed to a property. So there's plenty of help out there. But generally, really good questions, good things to be thinking about. I think I would advise looking to find adjacent business models which already have that, and then look at the clauses in there as a starting point.
Okay, thanks, James. Clark, I'm going to come to you with a similar question. James points out maybe it might be easier to handle in a B2B context. What would your view be about the same question, effectively, that Jen asks about what happens if you go into a domestic environment? So if you have a long-term agreement with a heating and service contract in your own home, and perhaps for some reason you have to relinquish your home, you move, or you have to give up your home, what do you think plays into the domestic marketplace around the risks for the manufacturer providing a long-term contract into a home which is now built in, the heat pump's built in, the insulation work's been done, all the upfront effort's been made and invested, and then there's an issue? What would you say are the risks and the legal aspects about that?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question, and it's also quite difficult to answer because a lot of these propositions haven't been around for that long. So it's difficult there haven't been that many defaults, there haven't been that many case studies where you could, study this and see what happens. Our understanding is in general that the default rate from existing propositions is very low. And it's not something that providers generally see as a big risk. I mean, as with most other contracts, the customers will undergo credit checks and things like that to see that they're low risk, so to say. With regards to tax issues, I have to say I'm not quite sure how that would work. If there is a default, we haven't heard from any providers that they would actually come and take the appliance away from the customer, even though I think they probably would be legally allowed to do so, but I don't think that's not a reputation that you want as a provider. Some poor family or person who can't afford or who forgets to pay or for whatever reason stops paying, then get their heating appliance ripped out and cold through the winter. Doesn't look great as a review on Yelp. So I think, it's about mitigating the risk and actually, checking who you're selling these contracts to. We have heard from providers that, if for whatever reason the customer stops paying, there's usually a kind of a plan for how to a repayment plan for how they can get back on track, or worst case they it might be sent to a debt collection agency, or same way as I suppose many other defaulted contracts would be.
Yeah, I guess I was just reflecting, Clara. James pointed out looking for maybe adjacent business models. I guess if we think about providing a heater service into, maybe we compare it to someone having a flat in a residential block. When you buy a property, you buy into the service provision within a block of flats. Because I guess if you then sell your property, that the buyer accepts the new service provider as well. So I guess that there may be some existing business models where we are used to buying into a service that we get with a property. It's just a different service we're buying into. So maybe there are, as James says, some adjacent business models which we can look at and see that there are similarities. It may be not as strange as people think maybe.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And if it's not for these contracts kind of being cancelled before the contract ends, there are usually two different ways. So either you would do just that, the next owner would take over the contract, or you can also kind of pay the remainder of your remaining balance, and then you take over ownership of that appliance, and then you sell it as a part of your home, your flat, your house, whatever you're selling.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Clara.
Sorry,
go on, James.
I was going to say, just to add to that, there is evidence that with heat as a service, energy as a service propositions emerging to market, the credit rating actually improves for the customer, first of all, because if they were to default on an energy saving or bill reducing asset, life gets harder for them. Whereas, so therefore they would, if they have to default, they're more likely to default on something like a Sky TV subscription or something else. Life is not going to get harder for them when they do that, but life will get a lot harder if they default on something that's making their life cheaper. So there's generally good good evidence out there for that. So just one point to consider from that perspective.
Thank you, James. That's great. So I'm just asking anybody else who would like to put some questions in the Q&A, please go ahead. I'm going to move to a question that we received early on in the session. Project, this is for yourself. Instead of thinking about the customer end of the proposition here, a question here from Jonas Hildebrandt asks if you have got an experience or any experiences or case studies you're aware of where we're thinking about someone within the value network of a component provider who sells their part into what may be a heat as a service solution. So maybe they sell a component part into a pump or a boiler or some component of that system. Have you experience of how they get into the system and how they provide a product which is going to be eventually sold through a heat as a service contract?
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting question. So I think as you mentioned, Ian, it's very much about the value network and that component supplier's proximity to the end customer. So if you're thinking of heating as a service or cooling as a service, if you're a pump supplier into a chiller or a heat pump, who is really your customer? Is it the OEM or is it actually the end user? It's likely, let's say if it's the OEM, if your component is quite mission critical to the OEM's outcomes, for example, if the OEM is providing a guaranteed cooling temperature to a supermarket and your equipment is very mission critical to achieving that temperature, you are very likely to be taking away a lot of risk from that customer to you. That means you're adding a lot more value. So if you look at that staircase we spoke about, there is more potential for you to add value if you're taking away risk. If your proximity to the end customer or to even your current customer's outcomes is very far away, you're not in short proximity, it is more and more difficult to add value. So if your component is not that mission critical to the chilling function or the heating function, it is going to be more difficult for you to say, we can give you an as a service model. At the same time, if your customer, an OEM, wants to deliver heat as a service or cooling as a service, it is in their benefit to collaborate with you to do that, because they are passing on the risk to you. They are passing on risk down the supply chain. They cannot do this themselves, which is something almost all OEMs are coming to understand now. And as a service model is not something you do by yourself. You need your value network to support you, which means all the at least mission critical equipment component suppliers in that. So I think for those type of component suppliers, there's huge value sitting here. And we have some examples of businesses where we are doing this. Something as simple as a rope that is being put into a very complex equipment that is being servitized. So yes, there is potential, and if there's something specific you would want to discuss, we are happy to go into the details offline.
Okay, thank you, Parachit. So just pick up, I guess, a common theme, your discussion about the complex nature of finding maybe a group of companies that work and partner together, similar to James's point about trying to find companies that are going to partner, maybe don't do the whole thing themselves. So I guess a common thread of a complex picture there. I guess if we have a complex picture requiring partnerships, it also requires us to have a good market in which we're going to try and target to be successful. I just wonder, Clara, would you maybe give us some of your thoughts about, from the research that you've done, which markets do you think are most likely to be the biggest opportunity where some of these things might come together because there's a profitable and a good market opportunity where maybe these things might be able to be successful?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can comment on the B2C side.
Yeah.
And I think for the domestic segment, you need to find a market where one or more of these drivers that I mentioned earlier are really important. And Germany stands out there as a market that not only has a lot of activity in these types of models. Just last year, we saw several heat pump as a service, normal heat as a service launching, and heat contracting is established there in for other appliances. The upfront cost barrier is a lot bigger here than for many other European markets. A heat pump often costs more than 20,000 euros even after the subsidies. So there's a really big barrier to many, and it seems that they're more accepting of a contract solution. But from just our late real life customer research and appetite for heat as a service, the UK is emerging as another interesting market. It had the highest appeal for heat as a service for customers' next heating purchase, and it's also the least established heat pump market out of the markets we were looking at. So the third driver there, the kind of peace of mind that customers can get from heat as a service from a knowledgeable and trustworthy provider to operate an appliance that customers and homeowners may not quite understand and might not be fully comfortable with, I think is an important one.
Okay, thank you, Clara. At this point, Jan also asked a question about insurance in the Q&A about whether if there was a fire on the property, what happens to the insurance. I think in that instance, like with other assets which are on the customer side, they're normally covered by the insurance. So I think the owner of the asset would have to provide the insurance. I think just to respond to that one, Jan. We spoke about the market. So you spoke about your experience in the B2C markets, Clara. James, I know from your background, could you maybe give us a sense of, I guess, do you think that the heat as a service market will take off and be successful in different geographies at different rates? Do you think there's a geographical or climate aspect which will allow this to be successful at a broader sort of strategic level?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think that's a very good question about climate as well. We've talked a lot about heat as a service, cooling as a service, but comfort as a service perhaps is a better outcome-oriented perspective. So I mean, I'm sitting here in the UK, and I remember last year in July, we had a heat wave for about a week or two, and a lot of people started buying air conditioning. So that's unusual for us to have such a heat wave, not so unusual in many other countries. So I think there's a kind of combined but increased need and use case in different geographies, and that may lead to a higher cost, barrier to entry if there are different technologies being used. So I think so. To answer that part of the question, yes, it will differ relating to the different technologies required to achieve a certain comfort level, both heating but also cooling. And I think also regarding kind of behavioral acceptance of different subscription type models, at least buying on finance. In the USA, it's very familiar to buy on finance. On solar PV, more than 90% of PV systems are purchased on finance, less than 5% in the UK. So there already you get these behavioural differences between markets. So I think there's all those factors combined, it means it's really important to understand your customers, your different segments, and how that's changing in your core markets and also emerging markets that you might be looking to expand into. It will be different.
Okay, and that's a dramatic difference between the US and the UK in terms of that number, isn't it? A large cultural difference between the two.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Patrick, can I just go back to you? You showed us on your services staircase. You showed us the arrows showing where people are and the aspiration maybe to get to a high level. I guess with your background, if you had a magic wand, I mean, what do you think could make the difference to be able to help companies to make that leap to go further up your staircase? What would be the thing, one or two things that will make the biggest difference, do you think?
I think one of the biggest challenges that companies face is their own culture, especially looking at very large companies where making products, selling products, developing new products has been the normal. Breaking out of that, changing the way you measure performance, looking at it from an outcome perspective rather than how many boxes of white kit have we sold, is a huge cultural difference and a cultural transformation for them. And I think if I had a magic wand, that's one hurdle I would just want to make vanish, because as much as there is a lot of literature on organizational transformation and cultural change out in the world, we don't have an answer for how businesses can start thinking about outcomes rather than products sold. And if you look at the way innovation works in a lot of businesses as well, product-led businesses are very comfortable thinking about new product innovation. Every time innovation comes into the picture, it's about what new features, what new product, what new technology are we going to integrate in our offerings. There's very little thought about what new services are we going to think about, because they are also intangible. You can't see them, you can't touch them, you can't drop them on the floor. So when it comes to designing new services, it's a very ambiguous process. And whether innovation teams take it very seriously, whether they go to the depth that is required for such outcome-based services is still very vague. And that's the biggest hurdle I see, is moving away from innovation is product innovation to thinking of business model innovation and service innovation, a more encompassing outcome-based solution to that.
Thank you very much, Judy. I'm smiling because there's a question or a comment and question coming in from Brian Gillespie, who again is asking the question about are companies looking at more service design thinking. So I think you and Brian would have a good conversation around the topic around our companies using service design thinking, ecosystem maps, etc., and systems thinking to try and overcome these complexities about partnerships. So I guess you're on a similar mind, I think. So thank you, Richard Brian, for your observation there. And certainly it seems to play into your thinking as well in terms of doing that too. That's really good. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So can I just ask from the panelist point of view, we've spoken about from the consumer point of view, from the business point of view, from the point of view of the providers, it's a complex issue. What do you think? Can I just go around each of you in turn and just think from the provider's point of view, it's a complex picture. What are the biggest risks do you think that the providers are going to have to overcome if they're going to actually make progress moving forward? It's clearly a complex pattern. What's the biggest risk they've got to better find out a way of managing if they're going to better provide a new heated service into the various markets or different sectors that we've spoken about today? James, could I ask you to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing quite like urgency to drive change. Urgency either to capitalize on an opportunity or urgency to defend a position. So I think, I would think about that in terms of look at the different players out there, look at matching your culture and strategy that the organization has with an organization that you may want to partner with. And I think that's a really important aspect. And yeah, I think make change. I think there's nothing, urgency drives change. It makes you take bigger risks out of necessity. And through that, will come comfort, because you'll recognize the success quickly. And you can do that in a planned way over smaller incremental changes, or in a one big leap, much like how Power by the Hour emerged out of necessity. I'm not sure that quite answers the question, but
it does.
What I'm thinking about.
It does, I think, Joe. I guess I use that analogy at the burning platform. I guess is burning platform. We've got a burning earth, haven't we? So I guess maybe there's a link between the two and what drives change. Clara, over to you. What would you say the biggest risk is providers need to overcome?
Not sure it's so much a risk as a barrier, maybe a bit of both, but specifically again for providers active in the domestic space, just understanding how much support the customer will need in that transition. That's kind of a barrier, but then following that, it's the risk of the behavioral risk of the customer, from everything from especially if energy supply is included, will they just randomly leave their window open because they like a bit of fresh air while still running their heat pump at full speed? Will they be calling every week to ask questions about their appliance, or is it, oh, it made this noise? Like all of those things that you wouldn't have to worry about if you just put the product in and then left it there. So it's about being prepared for a lot of hand holding of the customer.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Clara. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to call a halt to the Q&A session now. So thank you very much indeed, panelists. Thank you, Clara. Thank you, James. Thank you, Parachute. And thank you for all the people that posted questions today in the Q&A. Just to remind you, we're going to speak a little bit. We haven't spoken very much about our materials or tools. We've referred to a couple of them during the discussion today, but we have a website. You can see the address there. We publish a number of mini guides and guides and books on the topic of advanced services and servitization. That's not been the focus for today's discussion, but you'll find lots of information there. This is something that's piqued an interest in you in the topic at all. So those are there for you to find. And we also have a number of webinars. This is one of them. There are a number of them which are also available. They're available to watch on demand on our archive. Again, the website is there, and you'll get a recording of this webinar afterwards. The webinars, both either from 2021 or under our Servitization Live brand from 2022 and 2023, doing a range of different topics. Those are there for you also. And I can also tell you that our next webinar is coming up in under a month's time on the 7th of June, again, 2 p.m. UK British Summer Time. And we've got Parachute Night back again, this time with my colleague Ian McKechnie. And we also have a colleague coming from the US, from the AIM Institute, and they're going to be talking about driving servitization success with the business-to-business voice of customer skills. That's a very fascinating webinar. Some interesting viewpoint from both a service and a product point of view, and that will be happening in just under a month's time as well. Finally, we are delighted to see you here today. Remember, you will get an email with a link to this, so you can watch this again. You'll also be provided with a link to better access the white paper, which we're publishing, which covers the topic we've spoken today with some of the people on this call, but others as well. Different voices, different information around the topic of servitization and the movement towards heat as a service in the HVAC industry. But if you have any other interest or you want to get in contact with us, we've got a website you can see there. Please get in contact with us if you want to talk about servitization or the HVAC story that we've spoken about today. And there's our email address as well, and how to contact us on LinkedIn and also onto Twitter as well. So thank you very much indeed for everyone that came along today. We're delighted to see you. Please come back in a month's time. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.